You were doing okay. So why does it hurt again tonight? You made it through the week. You answered messages. You showed up where you needed to show up. You handled responsibilities. You even surprised yourself with how normal everything felt. So why now? Why at 1 a.m.? When the room is dim and the world has softened its volume? Does it feel like something old has quietly stepped back into the room? You were fine this afternoon. You were steady, functional, maybe even hopeful. And now your chest feels heavy in a way you don't fully understand. It almost feels embarrassing, like you've been caught revisiting something you told yourself you had already outgrown. I thought I was past this. That sentence stings in a specific way. Not dramatic, not explosive, just quietly disappointed. Because when you survive something painful, you expect distance to build naturally. You expect time to create separation. You expect memory to fade into something softer. You expect that one day you'll think about it, and it won't touch you the same way. And maybe that happened for a while. Maybe you reached a point where the memory felt dull, neutral, manageable. Maybe you even told someone, "I'm okay now," and you meant it. So tonight feels confusing. It feels like something regressed. But here's the thing no one really explains clearly. Healing doesn't move in a straight line. It doesn't climb upward and stay there. It moves in layers. And layers don't disappear just because you've seen them once. You can walk through a room and believe you've seen everything inside it. But then the light changes, and suddenly you notice textures you missed, corners you overlooked, details that weren't visible from your first angle. That doesn't mean the room is new. It means your perspective is. Tonight might not be the return of old pain. It might be the unveiling of a deeper layer. During the day, you are protected by momentum. There are conversations, deadlines, noise, small obligations that keep your mind occupied. You don't have space to wander too far inward. But at night, when the distractions thin out, the interior becomes louder. And what's quiet during the day doesn't disappear. It waits. Triggers are rarely dramatic. They don't usually arrive with warning sirens. Sometimes it's a song you didn't expect to hear, a sentence that sounded similar to something once said to you, a tone in someone's voice, a pause in a conversation, a moment of loneliness that feels slightly too familiar. Sometimes it's nothing identifiable at all, just a shift, a subtle internal drop, and suddenly you're there again, replaying, reconsidering, refeeling, not because you want to, not because you enjoy reopening old doors, but because something inside you wasn't finished. And unfinished things have a way of resurfacing. This is the part that feels unfair. You did the work. You cried. You processed. You journaled. You talked it out. You promised yourself you wouldn't let it affect you the same way again. You believed you were through the hardest part. And maybe you were. But the hardest part isn't always the deepest part. The first wave of healing is often about survival. You're stabilizing. You're getting your footing. You're learning how to breathe without breaking down every hour. That stage is intense, visible, raw. But once that settles, there are quieter layers that only show up later. They don't scream. They whisper. And whispers are easier to ignore during the day. But at 1 a.m., whispers feel amplified. You might be asking yourself right now, why does this still have power over me? That question feels heavy because you don't want it to have power. You want it to be something you overcame, something you can reference calmly, something that belongs firmly in the past. But emotional memory doesn't operate on logic alone. Your nervous system remembers. Your body remembers, even when your mind believes it has moved on. And sometimes what resurfaces isn't the event itself. It's the meaning you attach to it, the story you told yourself about what it said about you. Maybe it made you feel replaceable, or invisible, or not chosen, or not enough, or too much. Maybe it left a question hanging. Was I not worth staying for? Did I misunderstand everything? Did I matter the way I thought I did? Those questions don't always get resolved immediately. Sometimes you silence them because they hurt too much to explore. And then months later, in the quiet, they gently ask to be felt again. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're ready. There's a difference. When something first hurts you, your primary instinct is protection. You guard yourself. You distract. You rationalize. You try to restore stability. But once you feel safe enough, your system might say, now we can look closer. And looking closer can hurt in a different way. Not sharp. Not chaotic. Just deep. Tonight might not be about the surface story. It might be about the deeper belief underneath it. And that belief doesn't get resolved by time alone. It gets resolved by attention. You might notice something subtle. Even though you're hurting, you're not unraveling the way you used to. You're not texting impulsively. You're not spiraling into catastrophic thoughts. You're sitting. You're reflecting. You're listening. That's different. It might not feel impressive, but it is. Regression pulls you under. Growth allows you to observe. And tonight, even in discomfort, you are observing. That space between you and the pain is evidence of progress. You can feel something without being consumed by it. That wasn't always true. It might not feel like strength, but it is a quieter form of strength. Sometimes healing feels like losing ground because you expected distance. But healing is less about distance and more about integration. Distance says, that doesn't affect me anymore. Integration says, that affected me and I understand why. Distance can be fragile. Integration is steady. And integration requires revisiting. Not to relive, not to suffer again, but to feel what wasn't fully felt. You may be realizing tonight that part of you is still tender. That doesn't cancel the resilience you built. It simply reveals that resilience and tenderness can coexist. You can be strong and still have sensitive places. You can have moved forward and still feel echoes. Those echoes don't erase your steps. They remind you that you're human. There's a quiet fear underneath nights like this. What if I never fully get over it? That fear deserves gentleness. Because getting over it often means erasing the impact. And some experiences aren't meant to be erased. They're meant to be integrated into who you become. You don't get over losing trust. You rebuild it. You don't get over being hurt. You learn how to hold that hurt without letting it define you. You don't erase chapters. You absorb their lessons. And absorption takes time. Not linear time. Layered time. Tonight feels fresh. Because you're touching a layer that once felt too heavy. And here you are. Still breathing. Still listening. Still open enough to feel. That's not failure. That's capacity. Notice how the pain feels now compared to before. Before, it may have felt like drowning. Now it feels like a deep ache. That shift matters. Before, you might have begged for it to stop. Now you're curious about why it's here. Curiosity is growth. It doesn't eliminate discomfort, but it transforms your relationship to it. There's something important to consider gently. What if this isn't you going backward, but healing deeper? Let that question sit. Not as a motivational phrase, not as forced positivity, just as a possibility. What if tonight is evidence that your system trusts you more than it used to? What if it believes you're strong enough now to handle the parts you avoided before? What if the resurfacing isn't a reset, but a refinement? Imagine healing like cleaning a wound. The first pass removes obvious debris. It stings. It's messy. It's urgent. But deeper cleansing happens later. It's slower, more precise, and sometimes surprisingly tender. That doesn't mean the first cleaning failed. It means healing has stages. You are not at the beginning. If you were at the beginning, this would feel chaotic. Instead, it feels reflective. Heavy, yes, but thoughtful. You're not panicking. You're processing. That distinction is quiet but powerful. You might still wish it didn't hurt. That's okay. Wishing for ease doesn't negate growth. But don't confuse discomfort with defeat. They are not the same. Progress doesn't disappear overnight. It doesn't evaporate because one memory resurfaced. It doesn't collapse because you felt something intensely again. Growth embeds itself, even when emotion revisits. Think about who you were the first time this broke you. The version of you that didn't know how to cope yet. The version of you that felt blindside. That person did the best they could, and they carried you to this point. Now you're here, with more language, more awareness, more steadiness. You might not see it clearly, but you're not reacting the same way. You're responding, even if your response is simply to sit and breathe. That's different. Healing loops. It doesn't reset. It circles back to strengthen. It revisits to integrate. It asks, are we ready to feel this more honestly now? And tonight maybe you are. Not because it's easy, but because you're capable. There's no rush to solve it. No requirement to make meaning immediately. You don't need a breakthrough tonight. You just need permission to feel without judging yourself for it. You thought you were over this. Maybe you were over the surface. Now you're understanding the depth. And depth is still forward. It's quieter than dramatic recovery. It doesn't look impressive from the outside, but internally it's profound. You're not back at zero. You're not undoing months of effort. You're layering insight onto experience. You're strengthening emotional muscles that used to give out quickly, even if your chest feels tight, even if your eyes burn, even if your thoughts loop for a while. Stay gentle. The wave will crest. It always does. Not because you forced it away, but because waves move. You are not the same shoreline you were before. You're wider now, stronger, more aware of your edges. The wave hits differently. It may still sting, but it doesn't wash you away. Tonight might feel fresh, but you are not fresh in this pain. You've met it before. You've survived it before. And survival has evolved into understanding. That's growth. Not loud, not flashy, just steady. So if it hurts tonight, Let it hurt without turning it into a verdict about your progress. It's not a verdict. It's a visit. And visits end. You are not starting over. You are moving inward. And inward is not backward. It's deeper. Stay here. Breathe slowly. You are not back at zero. You are integrating. You are strengthening. You are becoming someone who can feel deeply without disappearing. And that is forward, even at 1 a.m., especially at 1 a.m.